Hi, everyone. Welcome to Breaking Your Marginalized Mentees into Tech, empathizing with your mentee community and developing equitable goals for long-term professional growth. My name is Emmy Lantz. I am a UX designer, lead UX designer at Whisker, which is an IoT connected device. But more importantly, I am an ADPList mentor, and it is one of my favorite things that I do as a professional. And so this is something that's been on my heart for a while. I work with a lot of mentees that come from a lot of different backgrounds, so I really wanted to discuss this today. So I did put in a poll. If you would want to do that poll, that would be great. The question was, how did you find out about design? And it looks like most people are finding out about it online. Okay, so here's a quick thought exercise. If we could all just take a breath, maybe center ourselves for a second and just think, what if you didn't have your computer or your phone this week? Or what if you didn't have drinkable water when working from home? Or you lived in an unsafe environment or were around abuse? What if you had no access to mental health resources and were mentally ill? And finally, what if your country or location was not in a peaceful state? Now, there are many ways to experience marginalization, and these are a few of those things that people are going through, whether it's identity, sexual or gender, race, socioeconomic class, education, background, location. I want you to think about, how would this affect your professional life? What would your professional life be like if you didn't have safety, if you didn't have access to technology, if you didn't have access to education? So let's go ahead and see this poll real quick. How did you find out about design? Wow. So most of you found out about design on online, and the rest a little bit spread out. I also found out about design online. So you can see, if you didn't have a computer or access to internet or fast internet, you would be under a marginalized class. You wouldn't have access to some of the information that you already do today. All of us here today are privileged. We all have the ability to sit here and talk and discuss and learn and be menteed or mentor. And that is a huge privilege that I just all want us to kind of like go through this presentation today with understanding. So let's go ahead and hide this. Ooh. Could you bring back the presentation? Thank you. Cool. So how would this affect your professional life? So today I want to talk about the digital divide. And the digital divide is an economic and social inequality in the access to, use of, or impact of information and technologies. Now, this is a very large, wordy thing that was actually made by a commerce organization of the government, just talking about those that have the ability to have access to technology, education, and the abundance of that, and those that don't. Now, you may have heard the word privilege, and that's more of what I want to talk about today. So, that technological divide, that digital divide, is really between those that have tech privilege and those that do not. So, what is tech privilege? Well, technological advantage available only to a particular group. And so, I think we kind of already know and have an understanding, at least if you're in the United States, what that advantage is and what that particular group is. But I want to talk about the people who are not in that particular group today. I want to talk about people who do not have that advantage. What is the advantage? Okay, so the San Francisco Examiner, a tech person in 2018, came out and started talking about privilege. And it was something that's been kind of talked about in circles in tech, at least since I've been in here for the last like 10 years. What privilege looks like, what technological privilege looks like, are these four things. Access. So, like I've been talking about, access to education, access to a computer, access to internet, access to knowledge, and then access to how to utilize all those things. Pedigree. So, pedigree just means education. And as we talk about today, and maybe you know this and have experienced this yourself, Pedigree goes a long way. Your education goes a long, long way in design. And when you have a pedigree, when you have an education, and when you have a great resume with a great cover letter, you have a privilege. You have a one up on a lot of different people. Freedom and financial security go hand in hand. So those two things a lot of people don't have. And the freedom can look like maybe you have to be a caregiver. Maybe you have a lot of kids. Maybe you're taking care of the elderly in your family. Maybe you don't have freedom to learn. Maybe you don't have the freedom to be mentored at ADPList. So just keep in mind, just time is a freedom. And then also the financial security of being able to take off time for a boot camp. Can you imagine? I I did take off time for a boot camp and I didn't have the financial security and it was very scary. And you have to understand when your mentees don't have these things and they still are wanting to get into design. They're still wanting to get into technology. It is very important that we encourage that because it's beautiful and it's one of the things that I think that risk is really intense. So you have these four things: access, pedigree, freedom, financial security. But I want to talk about the biggest thing, I think, which is a sense of belonging. You know, you've heard of this thing called design imposter syndrome, and maybe you've experienced it yourself. And so I'd say that this is one of the most important things that people in tech actually have. If you're in Silicon Valley, if you have the access, pedigree, freedom, financial security, you've been given all those things and you've been told that you should get into tech, you feel like you might belong there. Our marginalized mentees, they don't feel like that. They feel like they're on the outside looking in. And it's really important to understand that. Okay, I have a new poll now. Let's see here. So, have you heard of the digital divide? Have you heard of technology, the technological gap? Because marginalization in design is rooted in that gap, right? It's rooted in between having that privilege, having access, pedigree, freedom, financial security, a sense of belonging, and not having that. And you can see when you have all of that as a package, how much easily you can get into this industry. So let's see if see the poll. So it looks like, oh, half and half. Half of you have and half of you have not. Wonderful. And let's do one more poll. Do you identify as marginalized? Now that we kind of discussed what it is, what it looks like, do you find yourself being part of that group? Are you on the in group? Are you on the out group? Are you somewhere in the middle? I think a lot of us honestly are somewhere in the middle. And I think that we might have a lot of these privileges, but there are some privileges that we don't have. And I think it's important to say that there isn't a real black and white. This is a very gray area when we start talking about this. So let's go ahead and see the poll. Give you a little bit more time. A little bit half and half. So it looks like, half of, but I mean, I do want to point out though, like you are now with at least 10 to 11 to 12 people that identify as marginalized. So this is a real thing. You are around these people and it's important to know and acknowledge and empathize and really try to help out those who are marginalized. So, what does the digital divide and tech privilege look like? Now, there's a ton of statistics and there's a ton of data, and I don't want to get too far into it, but I wanted to show some of the craziest data that I saw, which is 82% of bachelor's degrees in CS go to men, while only women get 18%, only 20% are Black or Latinx. One of the big things I found was insane is low income students and students of color are um, less likely to have access to CS courses in their high schools, and I think that that is a huge, huge divide. Education and getting into technology in high school can really change the game for you. Bias in resume reviews due to ethnic sounding names. Female candidates being rated less positively, receiving fewer callbacks, being less likely to advance interview rounds. This is all real things. That is real data, according to the Kapoor Institute. Just 1 in 10 employees across some of the largest and top grossing tech companies are Black and Latinx. Absolutely astounding numbers. And one of the ways that it looks like this is you can see these mountains get bigger and bigger in this graphic here. And because of that, between 2014 and 2020, Black representation in tech increased only by 1 percentage point. So at that rate, Black tech employees would achieve parity in 2068. Absolutely crazy. Some of the reasons why are because of workforce pathways bias in hiring, right? They're looking for stunning educations. They're going to Stanford, they're going to top tier universities. And that really does exclude talent from those who go to boot camps, those going to 2 and 4 year degree universities. And then when there's bias in hiring, like we just talked about, because of names or location or education, it's already stopping a lot of workers from getting to the point of even getting a job. And then as they go along in the job, there's pay inequality, there's bias in advancement, and a lot of these things have not taken place, in the non-marginalized areas. And so I really wanted to point out that there isn't just a single point of friction, but there are points of friction from wanting to get into tech, to even hearing about tech, to wanting to get into tech, to learning a trade or a skill or a design or code, and then getting hired, and then also being hired. So I want to talk about now that type of path and why it's so difficult to do that. Let's do another poll real quick. Did you have access to technology growing up? That's the next poll. Cool. So I want to talk about my community a little bit. And one of the biggest things I can say is if you want to learn about the queer community, please pick up one of these queer experience in design stats from queerdesignclub.com that has a lot of great information. That's where I'm pulling most of my information from. But one of the things I want to talk about is 1% of US deals go in favor of LGBTQ plus founders, right? So there's not a lot of LGBTQ plus investment in the United States. But the one number that's kind of buried here that I want to talk about is 30% of LGBTQ plus entrepreneurs choose not to out themselves. Okay, think about that. Talk about design imposter syndrome. Am I right? Like, imagine having such imposter syndrome. You're not able to out yourself. You're not able to be your real self. You are choosing a fake identity just so that you can have a job. This is a reality. This is a reality for me. And I think it's important, or was a reality for me. And I think it's important to point that out. LGBTQ plus people are generally not called back as much. And one of the most startling facts right now is that only 20 states, that means 30 states, allow employer discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. That means out of 50 states, the majority of our states allow discrimination based on identity. And it's really heavy to kind of take that in and realize, like, there are people around you that are allowed to be discriminated legally. Let's go to the poll real quick. Did you have access to technology growing up? Yeah, I love this. I love that there's some at times. I'm also one of the at times people. I did have access to technology every now and then, but a lot of that happened at school, and a lot of it did not happen at home. Wonderful. The majority of people, it does look like they did have access to technology, which is great. I think that that was one of the things I was kind of assuming due to the fact that we're all here today. But I would love to hear from the no's. So if you did not have access to technology, please feel free to comment in chat on what that was like. I would love to hear from you. So going all the way back, how do we break marginalized mentees in the tech? So we had our thesis, right? Our thesis statement is saying, hey, we legitimately have some problems here in technology, especially in design, and we need to do something about it. So what do we do about this? Well, first of all, we need to be aware of our tech privilege and how it's affecting our mentees. I think the first thing is just a big old shot of self awareness, right? Just down the self awareness and realize, hey, like there are times where I didn't have privilege, but there are times where I have. And I think that when we start getting into these groups, when we start getting into our professional life, when we start meeting other professionals, we tend to kind of forget where we came from or forget how difficult it was to break into tech. And I think it's really important to know how marginalization could be affecting our mentees' mental health, physical health, and how we are now, especially once you get into tech, and become privileged, I do feel like there is a chasm communicatively. So we have to understand and be self-aware and be able to communicate with our mentees in a way that acknowledges our privilege and doesn't overcast it. I think it's really important to distribute resources to marginalized students accessibly, equitably, and freely. Okay, why? Well, for all the reasons that I've already stated. The things that what will change all of that is access, right? The ability to have these resources. And that's why I love to mentor for ADPList. Okay? ADPList is one of the biggest disruptors in this industry, and it is one of the best ways that you can distribute resources in an equitable and equal fashion. I try to harness this as much as possible. I try to meet my mentees where they're at as much as possible and give as much resources as I can. I try to buy books. I try to create resource lists, all in the name of democratizing design. And without ADP lists, I don't know where we would be, if I'm completely honest. So I just want to say thank you to Felix and everybody there. So, another question I did not ask before because I just kind of wanted to know. I'll just publish this real quick. Are you a mentee or a mentor today? So another thing that we want to do is help them overcome imposter syndrome by owning their stories. I think one of the problems that we have is you just want to cover up maybe that you didn't have privilege, or you want to get into design and you want that imposter syndrome to go away, so you just want to fit in. And I think that that's one of the worst things that can happen to somebody is not bringing your narrative, is not bringing your story into it, because that's not real empathy. Real empathy is being yourself, and real empathy is overcoming that imposter syndrome, owning who you are, owning your past. But it's really hard to do that. So we have to help them. We have to help these mentees do that by helping them overcome these fears of imposter syndrome. I think it's really important. There's a lot of different imposter syndrome uh, courses here today. I really saw one that was really valuable just before I started speaking. And I think it's really important that we try to help our mentees overcome imposter syndrome. I think the best way is to be invested in them, to be invested in their stories, and also just be proud of them. I can't tell you how proud I am of some of my mentees. It's about to cry. It's actually awesome to see people grow from places of marginalization and then gain jobs and then gain a foothold and then become professionals. It's absolutely amazing. Allow space for saying no. Sometimes you shouldn't take a job. And sometimes it's not about getting your mentee a job. Sometimes it's about getting your mentee the right job. So allow space for saying no. If it's not a great place for them, you should speak up. You should know. And you should try to value what they can give and what the organization can give them when you're breaking them into tech. So make sure it's the right fit. Advocate for your mentees' mental health. Some of my mentees actually make fun of me at this point, but I say it almost every single session. Hey, how's your mental health doing? Hey, like make sure your mental health is like make sure you're valuing your mental health. Make sure you're taking breaks. One of the things that I love to tell people after they finish boot camp is, "Hey, have you taken a break? Have you pat yourself on the back yet? Have you been able to just be happy and go out to dinner with your family?" Like these are all things that are really important to just build confidence. Cool. Let's see. So let's see the stage. Awesome. I love that there's a lot of mentees here. Thank you, mentors, for joining as well. Cool. Hide poll from stage. Alrighty. I think I have one more poll. Okay. We'll get to that one. So marginalization doesn't end when you break into tech. Now we're going to talk. I think the mentees will understand this a little bit more too. That once you break into tech, it doesn't stop there. What does that mean? Well, 41% of trans designers lost employment due to COVID-19. That's a huge number. Imagine 40% of the people in your community just lose their job. Or imagine that only 10% of workplaces have your healthcare in mind at all. It's actually a startling number. One of the things that I find very interesting is how many trans people that I talk to that have to pay for their own healthcare outside of their organization. And it's because just the organizations just have an oversight. And it's really interesting to think that your community can just be an oversight to HR. 7.5% lower annual income reported by lesbian designers in comparison to queer male designers. I found that really interesting as well. There is a huge, huge gap and disparity of finances here. Here's some other numbers. 64% of women feel they've been discriminated in the workplace compared to 7% of men. I actually found a study, and I didn't want to put it on here, but there was a huge study on a lot of men just didn't believe that there was workplace discrimination, and I found that really interesting. LGBTQ plus women in tech earn 90 cents for every dollar. Women and people of color in tech report more stereotyping, harassment, and bullying. And 53% of women in tech experience harassment at work compared to 16% in men. And women were 22% more likely to experience imposter syndrome. Think about that. Think about these marginalized communities. The percentages don't lie. And it's really interesting when you look at this to see marginalization in data. Because I love quotes. Here's a really great quote from somebody from the Queer Design Club list. I feel like I am constantly having to advocate for myself, which makes me feel uncomfortable. I am the youngest on staff, so people don't take me seriously. I'm constantly misgendered, and it feels awkward to correct people. It has taken a huge toll on my mental health. How do you work? How do you work like that? When you've gotten through your marginalization, you've gotten through your imposter syndrome, you got a mentor, you got the job, and now your mental health is taking a toll. It's really tough for our marginalized mentees. So how do we prepare our marginalized mentees for this difficult future? Well, I think the first thing is to be honest. I didn't write this down, but I think the first thing is to be honest with them. Mentees, it is hard. It is very difficult to be in tech. It is even more difficult to be in tech when you're coming from a background that didn't say, hey, you're going to be in tech since you were 9 years old. And I'm saying that from experience. So, one of the ways that we can really start developing a better way forward is building our own safe spaces in our own organization and advocating for people who have broken into technology from marginalized groups. And what that looks like is not just building a group outside of your organization or going to groups outside your organization, but it means to build them inside. Knock on the doors of your leadership. Your leadership may not look like anybody who is marginalized. That is the case in most organizations. But that should not stop you as a mentor to knock on the doors and say, "Hey, we need to start thinking about this. We need to start building safe spaces for our marginalized people that are coming in to our organization." I recently left a company where all the DEI work was grassroots, just regular employees trying to make things better and leadership ignoring them. My current company is the complete opposite. It's amazing how less burnt out I am. I have more time for helping out my community and doing things that I love. So here's a question. If you are working right now, does your workplace value marginalized communities and offer meetups and meetings? I'll just let that go. We'll keep that in the back here. Okay, so communicate realistic expectations of your mentee's future career. I think it's really, really important that we communicate the realistic future of what it looks like to be into tech and give them different ways to deal with it. I think uh, I'm always looking out for mental health of my mentees. And I think one of the best ways is saying, hey, not everything's going to be perfect once you get a job. Mentees, if you don't have a job right now and you are searching for a job, you're going to get one, but it doesn't end there. It's difficult. And it's difficult for me. It's difficult for a lot of people. But know that it's worth it and know that you do have a future here, but also understand that a lot of the overly optimism is saying, hey, once I get a job, it's all over. I'm fine. That's not always the truth. And know that it might be an uphill battle, but it's always, always worth it. And I want to welcome you into the design community and into the tech community with open arms. So, as we wrap up here, you want to stay tuned, be available, and encourage from the sideline. Let's see this poll. Does your workplace value marginalized communities and offer meetups and meetings? So about half and half. That's wonderful. I love seeing that it's actually the majority say yes. I think well, now we're going back down. But I think it's really important that your organization does. So if they do not, please, please, please knock on that door. Advocate for those who are marginalized. So there's a reason why I didn't talk about myself at all at the very beginning. And it's because I come from a few marginalized groups. My name's Emmy. I'm a mentor at Prime. I'm a mentor at Prime Academy in Minnesota. I'm a mentor at ADPList. As you know, I'm a mentor at Downrange Design, which is my own mentorship program. And I'm also a senior designer at Whisker. But that's a really cool resume, isn't it? I have a really nice resume. It looks really cool. It has a cat on it. Everyone says it's cute. But what doesn't my resume say? Before I was in tech, well, first of all, let me describe my marginalized classes. So I am trans. I am neurodivergent on the autism spectrum. And before I broke into tech, I was homeless. And I was living in a tent in Arizona. And I still find myself privileged because I was able to have a 2010 laptop with me in 2017 and was able to take some graphic design courses in the state school that I went to. And so while I was at Barnes and Noble, I started I was working at Barnes and Noble. I started using their discount and buying books on design. And I got obsessed. And I didn't know anyone in design. I didn't know anyone in technology, but I knew this is the thing I wanted to do. This is what I believed I could do. And that's how I broke in. I knocked on every single door I could, and somehow I got into tech. And it was hard. And it's been hard this whole time. And it's something that I think that my main purpose in life is to make it less hard for others. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit about me. I would love to have some Q&A, and in sake of time to get the Q&A going, let's not have a breakout room. And if you just want to in the chat, what was it like to break into tech for the first time, or what is it like to break into tech for you right now? I would love to read some of those chats. And I think that maybe we should go into some Q&A now. Got about 10 minutes left. Cool, thank you. Would you mind sharing your past experience becoming a mentee and got an amazing mentor? Yeah, so I was never a mentee, but I've had some amazing, amazing people in my life that have really lifted me up. One of those was a UX designer at a place when I was just a graphic designer. And his name was Chewy, and he really got me on fire, and he would bring me into UX meetings. So I was just like this random, I had no idea what I was doing. I was like running podcasts, and he would bring me into UX meetings. He'd bring me into sprints, and I'd see all these post-it notes, and I'd be like, what is all this stuff? I think sometimes it's just grabbing the person next to you, pulling them into something that you know that you just know that they'd be good at? All right, next question here. How do we collectively overcome this kind of stigmatization? What can we do to individually make it right? That's a tough question. Um, I think it's about telling your story. I think it's about kind of doing what I'm doing right now. I think it's about kind of doing what you're doing right now. And that's sitting in a room together and talking about where we're from. I think it's breaking it down. I think so much of it, we want to just have this professional filter. We want to be an influencer almost in the professional world, and we don't want to be honest about what has happened to us, some of our past traumas, our past histories, our past mistakes. And I think by ignoring those things, we ignore the empathy that we can bring to others. So I think individually, I think it's being honest. I think it's being open. I think it's not allowing yourself to be stigmatized. I think is the first thing to do there. Being an immigrant woman of color in Canada, I find it very difficult to navigate the tech job market here. I know many similar people like me struggling into the job market too. What would you suggest we can do? Whew. Um, you know, I also have struggled in the tech market in the United States, and I think it's not on you. I think you should just take a breath. I think you should be able to breathe and say for once that this is not your responsibility. It is our responsibility. It's the people's responsibility in the organizations. I think that too much we put it on the mentee. I think too much we put it on junior designers. Just design. Just try to break in. Uh, I think you're doing the right things right now. You're at ADPList. You're at BeMore Festival. You're getting mentored. You're doing the right stuff. Um, Other people aren't. And I think it's okay, and I don't think it's okay. That's not okay, but I think it's okay to accept that, to see the reality for what it is, that maybe it's not fair, and there isn't justice, and there isn't equality right now. And maybe there's not something that you can personally do, and maybe it's somebody else's responsibility to start making that happen for you. But just know that your mental health is the most important thing, and just to keep doing what you're doing, keep the grind going. How might we empower marginalized mentees who hope to get a job from you? Yeah, like I said, I think having really good meetings, having good meetups, having time and space and safe spaces, uh, it will be really important to have those within your organization and allowing people to know that at the interview. I think it's really important. A lot of times you're in interviews and they'll talk about the organization, but they won't talk about fundamentally what the organization does for people in the organization. And I think it's important to really communicate that, not just to the people in your organization, but also to investors, also to your boardroom, right? If you're in that boardroom, let's stop being quiet about it. Let's start speaking up and saying, hey, here's something that I think that we should do. We should start investing time and money into these safe spaces for people from marginalized groups. And this might not make us revenue, but mental health, a organization that is strong, will matter a lot more in the long term. Next question. What are a couple of the major challenges you're experiencing and trying to overcome in your role? Oh, I love this. In your role at the moment. Um, Imposter syndrome. Uh, I think we all deal with it. I don't think there's ever a time where I don't feel imposter syndrome whispering into my back, you know? Um, One of the main challenges I have right now is we have taken on a huge project and I was able to hire people. And so now I'm leading a team. And I think the imposter syndrome for me is what what am I doing? Like, who am I to lead somebody else? Who am I to lead a team? And that is a constant question in my head of, oh, it's always there. But I think how I'm overcoming that, I'd have a really good meditation practice. I really highly recommend that. But also to take a lot of pride in my identity and my history and where I came from, and being able to feel proud of myself, even if that imposter syndrome is there. Um, I like to tell my mentees that pride in yourself is not like just something that happens. It's an exercise. It's something that takes practice. And so I have a practice of gratefulness and I have a practice of pride in myself. And I think that that's one of the best ways I've been overcoming like that. Oh, are you good enough to lead a team? Are you good enough to be a manager? Are you good enough to be a lead UX designer? Um, yeah, I am. And some days I don't feel like it, but I know that where I come from, I know how I got here, and I've known that I've earned this. And by knowing that and taking pride in myself and my work, that's how I overcome that challenge. What's the best advice or insights you received from your mentees? Oh, just how hard this is, just how difficult this is to break into tech, to break into design, to go from boot camp to a job. And the biggest insight is how mentally draining it can be, um, how heartbreaking it can be, but then also how rewarding it is. Um, when I see one of my mentees get a job, it's one of the best experiences of my entire life to see that pride and to see the optimism and the joy and yeah. So for the last 3 minutes before we leave, uh I'll take one more question and then we'll do some closing remarks. How's that sound, Ganesh? Cool. How can we try to create a group to support each other without appearing to be ingenuine? Oh man, I love this question. Really quickly, that's imposter syndrome talking. That's imposter syndrome talking. I could hear it from you. You aren't ingenuine, and maybe it's fake it till you make it. I think sometimes it's, hey, like if you're trying to do the right thing, does it matter if other people think you're trying to do it for clout? I think it's just take personal responsibility and saying like, "No, you know why you're doing this. You don't need to have somebody naysay you." You know what I'm saying? Like this is it's imposter syndrome to think that people would judge you for that. I think it's really important that if you feel the need or the want or the desire to start building those groups that you don't care what other people think. And just kind of put that to the side and realize what you're doing is for the betterment of your community, is for the betterment of you and the people that you are around. And that's the most important thing. Secondarily is what other people think. Give them a shrug, say bye, Felicia. And that's the last question for today. For closing remarks, I would just really like to say thank you so much for joining. I know that this can be such a hot topic and it's a difficult one as well. Um, but I just wanted to give some thoughts on how we can start bettering our community. And one of the best ways is ADPList. And we're all here for the same reasons, to be mentored or to mentee, to democratize design. And it's really important that we do this together. So I just want to say thank you for being part of my community, our community. Thank you for being a part of design. And thank you for joining uh, my talk today. And that is it. You can find me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/Emmy Design. I would love to meet anybody. Uh, as well as please look for me at some of the little chairs. Thank you.